McDonald's French fries. McDonald's fries in America contain a chemical preservative called TBHQ, along with dimethyl polysiloxane, an anti-foaming agent also used in silly putty. The European Union restricts the levels of several additives used in American fast food oil processing. McDonald's fries sold in the UK and Germany use a different formulation than the ones sold in the United States, with fewer preservatives and a shorter shelf stability window. The same golden fries, the same red box, a completely different ingredient list, depending on which side of the Atlantic you are standing on. Americans have been eating the more heavily preserved version for decades without noticing the difference existed.
Burger King chicken. Burger King's American chicken products historically used processed chicken treated with ractopamine, a growth-promoting drug fed to livestock to increase lean muscle mass. The European Union, China, and Russia have all banned ractopamine in meat production due to documented cardiovascular effects in animals and unresolved human health questions. The United States remains one of the few developed nations where ractopamine use in livestock is still legal and common. A burger sold at the same chain under the same name contains meat raised under completely different regulatory standards depending on which country's Burger King you walk into.
American sandwich bread. Azotocarbonamide appears in dozens of American commercial bread brands as a dough conditioner that speeds production and extends shelf life. The European Union banned it for food use outright. Singapore imposes criminal penalties, including imprisonment for using it in food production. American bread manufacturers continue using it because no federal ban exists, and the ingredient remains classified as generally recognized as safe by U.S. regulators, despite international consensus moving in the opposite direction. The bread aisle of an ordinary American supermarket contains a chemical that would result in jail time for the manufacturer in Singapore.
Flamin Hot Cheetos. Flamin Hot Cheetos contain red 40 and yellow 6, synthetic dyes that the European Union requires to carry a specific warning label stating a coloring may have an adverse effect on activity and attention in children. Most European manufacturers reformulate products sold in EU markets to avoid the warning label entirely, switching to natural colorants like paprika extract or beetroot. American Flamin' Hot Cheetos use the synthetic version without modification because no warning label requirement exists in the United States. The same snack, sold under the same name, carries a government-mandated health warning in one country and no warning whatsoever in another.
Mountain Dew. Mountain Dew in the United States contain brominated vegetable oil for decades, an additive that keeps citrus flavoring from separating in the drink. Brominated vegetable oil is banned in the European Union, Japan, and India due to evidence linking bromine accumulation in human tissue to neurological and thyroid effects at high consumption levels. PepsiCo announced plans to remove it from American Mountain Dew starting in 2020, following sustained consumer pressure, decades after international regulators had already prohibited it. The ingredient remained legal in American beverages for years after multiple other developed nations had independently concluded it should not be in food at all.
Skittles. Skittles sold in the United States contain titanium dioxide, a whitening agent that makes the candy shells appear more vivid and opaque. The European Union banned titanium dioxide as a food additive entirely in 2022, following a food safety assessment that could not rule out genotoxicity concerns. Mars, the manufacturer, reformulated Skittles sold in European markets to remove it while continuing to sell the original formulation in the United States. A California lawsuit in 2023 specifically targeted Mars for selling a version of Skittles in America that contained an ingredient the company had already proven it could remove for European consumers.
M&M'S. M&M'S in the United States use red 40, yellow 5, and yellow 6 synthetic dyes that require mandatory warning labels in the European Union. Mars reformulates M&M'S sold in the UK and EU using natural colorants extracted from sources like carmine, spirulina, and turmeric to avoid the warning requirement and consumer hesitancy around synthetic dyes. The American version has never required reformulation because no equivalent labeling law exists. The candy looks identical on the shelf in both countries. The ingredient panel tells a completely different story depending on which government regulated the product before it reached the shelf.
Gatorade. Gatorade contained brominated vegetable oil and its citrus flavors for years, the same additive found in Mountain Dew, used to stabilize flavor oils that would otherwise separate and float to the surface. PepsiCo, which owns both brands, announced removal plans for Gatorade around the same timeline as Mountain Dew following consumer pressure campaigns and online petitions that gained significant traction in the mid-2010s. The European Union had prohibited the ingredient outright for decades before American manufacturers voluntarily phased it out. A sports drink marketed around hydration and health contained an additive that international regulators had rejected before most American consumers had ever heard of it.
Pop-Tarts. Pop-Tarts contain TBHQ, tertiary butyl hydroquinone, a petroleum-derived preservative that extends shelf life significantly. The European Union permits TBHQ but restricts the maximum allowable concentration to levels lower than what American food manufacturers commonly use. Japan and several other countries have stricter limits or require additional labeling. Kellogg's has never reformulated American Pop-Tarts to reduce TBHQ content, despite international standards trending towards stricter limits over the past 2 decades. A toaster pastry sold continuously since 1964 contains a preservative whose acceptable concentration varies significantly depending on which country's food safety agency evaluated it most recently.
Kraft Mac and Cheese. The original American Kraft Mac and Cheese recipe used yellow 5 and yellow 6 to achieve its distinctive orange color. Following a 2016 consumer petition that gathered over 365,000 signatures, Kraft reformulated the American product to use natural colorants including paprika, annatto, and turmeric, completing the transition by 2016. The European and UK versions of Kraft Mac and Cheese had never contained the synthetic dyes in the first place because EU regulations made the synthetic version commercially impractical for that market. American consumers spent decades eating an artificially colored product that international markets had never been sold to begin with. Pringles. Certain Pringles flavors sold in the United States contain food dyes and preservative combinations that require warning labels under European Union regulations. Pringles manufactured for European distribution use reformulated recipes with natural colorants to avoid mandatory labeling requirements that would otherwise be required for the American formulation. The potato chip itself, made from the same dehydrated potato process globally, is identical. The flavor coding and preservative system applied afterward differs by region according to each market's regulatory requirements. A chip that starts as the same base product becomes a chemically different snack by the time it reaches the shelf in each country. Twinkies. Twinkies contain a combination of preservatives and stabilizers that extend shelf life dramatically, contributing to the product's reputation for near-indefinite freshness that became cultural folklore in America. Some of the specific stabilizers and emulsifiers used in the American formulation face stricter limits or outright bans in European Union food regulations. Hostess has not significantly altered the core American recipe despite international regulatory pressure trending toward reduced preservative use globally. A snack cake famous for surviving a nuclear apocalypse in American pop culture jokes is famous specifically because of preservative choices that other developed nations have decided are unnecessary for food production.
U.S. chicken. American poultry processing commonly uses chlorine washes to reduce bacterial contamination on chicken carcasses before packaging. The European Union banned chlorine-washed chicken imports in 1997, citing concerns that the practice allows lower hygiene standards earlier in the production chain, since the chemical wash compensates for contamination rather than preventing it. The ban became a significant point of contention in post-Brexit trade negotiations between the UK and the United States, with American trade representatives pushing for British markets to accept chlorinated chicken as a condition of expanded trade agreements. An entire national food safety standard has become a recurring diplomatic negotiating point between two countries that otherwise share most food culture.